Good evening and welcome to the City of Farmers Branch Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It is presently 6:30 p.m. Monday, March 25th, 2024 for our study session. I'd like to begin by thanking the commissioners for their service. In our study session, item A1, discuss regular agenda items. That takes us to item C1, consider approval of the March 11th, 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes and take appropriate action. Commissioners, any errors, comments, revisions?
I saw nothing in it that needed correction.
Okay. Well, we will move on to item C2. Consider the request for a detailed site plan on approximately 6.49 acres located at 13737 and 13757 North Stemmons Freeway and take appropriate action. We'll be presenting.
Lily.
Lily, fantastic. Do we have questions for staff?
Actually, Harold mentioned, like, how do they get in? Where's the driveway?
There are three access points along Stemmons through a shared drive. That was there before TxDOT acquired that property, and they're just pushing it back, basically.
Okay, because when I was looking at the blueprints, it was pretty hard to tell from the picture. Maybe it's just, I don't know how to read these things very well, but it's hard to tell where the driveways were and how they were going to get in and out. The only one that I could see was clearly a driveway was at that south end, opposite the direction of where the 45-degree angle parking spaces are. So there are others further north?
Yes, there's one at the southern corner, one at the northern corner, and then one in the very middle.
Okay, thanks.
And you know, we can also bring up an aerial, like when we're in the meeting, we can bring up Google Earth, just so that we get a little bit clearer picture of where those access points are. That's no problem.
That's helpful. So thank you, Lily, for clarifying the location of those entry and exit points. Any other questions? Will the applicant be here as well, or?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great.
Seems to me that this is one that's just born of necessity. They're getting squished by TxDOT, and they're trying to make the best of a bad situation here.
Correct. That is correct.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
And they have to make the parking spots at 45 degrees, otherwise there wouldn't be enough room to park to get into the parking spaces, right?
Once you do 90 degrees,
You need a lot
it
more
makes
room.
more. Yeah, it's real difficult knowing that the building's already there.
You're not going to move the building.
Right. Yeah. That would be difficult, or it'd be a big major undertaking. So yeah, having it at 45 degrees and then adding in the new landscaping, it just spruces the place up and it allows for the parking.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to look nice.
Absolutely.
Is there in writing anywhere that this landscaping is going to be irrigated?
You know, our landscape plans are always supposed to say that in the notes. So all landscape plans will contain that.
You will assure us that it will when it is finalized.
Absolutely. There's
'Cause
certain
I
notes.
couldn't find it in here.
I gotcha. So under our landscape requirements, there are certain notes that have to go within that plan, and it does require, and not only that, but our code requires that landscaping be irrigated as well. But we can double check that and make sure that those notes are included as well.
Thank you. Anything further? Any other? All right. Well, with that brings us back to item D1. We will conduct a public hearing and consider a request to amend the comprehensive zoning ordinance related to home occupation and take appropriate action. This will be Brian.
Commissioners, I'll be presenting this item tonight, so if you have any questions, please let me know.
Any questions for staff?
From the last time, it wasn't too long ago that you presented, were there changes? It seemed like pretty much the same thing.
It is. There were a few minor modifications that we made based off the final version of the ordinance, but otherwise it's pretty much the same, yes, sir.
Anything further? Yeah?
I actually had put several comments and questions in my margins here, so if you'll.
Please.
Under the section G, home occupation, and the definition of a home occupation, it lists a whole bunch of activity that is not detrimental, is performed in such a manner the person or may continue to enjoy the use of their property, notwithstanding the operation of home occupation. I was wondering, is it possible to make that a little stronger? I think all of us, if somebody next door is opening a home business, our preference is not that we can continue to live in our house, but that home business activity is virtually undetectable from a neighboring house.
Exactly.
And I would like to see that language, virtually undetectable by adjacent neighbors. And undetectable covers sight and sound, both, right? And the other question I had on that was, does there need to be anything about somebody not overly burdening the neighborhood power and telecommunications infrastructure? What if somebody's home business is Bitcoin mining and they've turned 3 of their bedrooms into server farms? So they're gonna massively increase the power requirements. I'm just throwing out a ridiculous hypothetical, but
You never know.
you never know, and you've had some experiences.
Sure.
So, do we need to have anything that they don't overly burden or to the detriment of the neighborhood, the power infrastructure? Because there's only so much power built in to the capacity going to any given neighborhood.
Would item C address that in its G3C? Home occupations expressly exclude the following uses, where it indicates radio, television, or similar equipment repair that might cause electrical interference or radio electromagnetic
Interference. But
interference.
That's a different, capacity and load is a different than interference, right? And this C, the way it's worded, seemed to me to pertain only to repair, not use of electronic equipment.
But that may be
I'm
the
just
site
throwing
for
out-
a revision.
Some things to noodle over.
Sure. And I mean, that's actually a really good point that you bring up. As far as like undetectable sight and sound, and then anything that's going to hinder internet, these are conditions that can be added. I
Yeah.
mean, once we make a motion, if that's something that the board desires to go to that extent,
I guess you
Yeah.
could even consider somebody using disproportionate amount of water for some,
I just wonder if, you know,
I mean, just,
if it gets to a point where they're doing something that's, you know, and I see what you're saying, like if they're, of course, they pay for that water,
Right.
whatever water they're using. So that's a bill that, you know, they would have to incur. The home occupation is really meant for, it's meant for these types of uses that again, we shouldn't see it, we shouldn't hear about it, we shouldn't, it should be like you should just see the home. Once
Right.
that use turns into something that becomes way more than just a residential use, then typically that's where code can get involved. Or
right, and that's what we want, but we want to define
Right.
that here.
Right.
And, you know, I think somebody doing cryptocurrency mining or setting up a game hosting servers on their property, I've actually known people that did that.
Well, so does
Or a
that-
soundproof room for band practice where you have amplification or for
Once something,
whatever.
once something gets beyond like, if it starts turning into a nuisance, like a noise nuisance, then our regular code, which is outside of this, our typical like code of ordinance, that kicks in. So whether we're talking about emissions, smells, sounds, noises that go beyond
Well-
no matter if there's a home occupation or just somebody having a this party or something, then a regular code can always kick in. And
I,
that's all complaint based.
I don't know that I've seen this, but I've heard where people had special wiring, like 220 wiring, which is commercial wiring for their home to operate like a wood shop. Now, and I'm kind of going to the extreme too, because
So, a
Yeah.
wood shop would go into, as long as it satisfies the virtually undetectable, because the big problem with a wood shop is the noise.
well, but then again, if you built a soundproof facility
Then-
that drew the power because it was soundproof and somebody was operating and, but see, to me, that, then you run into parking issues. I mean, because if you're having people over to participate in the band practice or, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
there's,
Which again, we address parking by
Right,
saying only in
right.
the driveway and only in front of their home. Now again, if it starts
Yeah.
spilling over and we get complaints, we have something to point at in our code.
Okay.
It takes me back to when you talk about like the internet overusing. I don't know. It's
Well, he didn't say, I mean, I think it's an interesting example, because he's not talking about the
Servers.
internet, actually, because there's almost no use on the internet for the Bitcoin, but the
the
power usage.
yeah,
So
but
you could-
isn't that their power? That's the power
But
that
if
that
but if you
person
had it in 3
utilizes.
bedrooms, I mean, it could get to a point where it was putting undue,
pipe
the
feeding
amount
water
that it was used
only
with-
has so much capacity.
yeah, exactly. So you could get to a point where you're using an amount of a
It causes
utility that
brownout on your
causes.
block.
Yeah, that's at least possible. I can.
or you could have a senior facility, like they put a senior person in each bedroom. They have 3 bedrooms. They have a round-the-clock nurse, because I have seen this in a neighborhood. And then each person may or may not have a, what do you call those things you breathe through?
Like a ventilator?
Ventilator, or maybe an iron lung, which nobody here knows except me. But
As far as like usage of
well, it's usage of power, plus it's parking, because I went to visit a lady once upon a time in Houston, and I said, I'm in the wrong place, I got the right street, but it was a home, it was a house, 4 bedrooms. I went in the house, they had 2 full-time nurse aide type people, 4 bedrooms, they had an elderly person in each bedroom, and it was like a senior care facility. And I didn't know that. I thought I was going to a senior care facility, but it was like
There's
one of the,
state laws, there's state requirements out there that do allow. I know what you're talking about, where folks can stay like in a home, residential home, for
Right,
elderly
right.
care and stuff. Yeah, okay, I see where you're
but
going.
how, but see, what happens is people spend the money, they sneak one of these things in on you, and a year later, the neighbor complains. How do we keep them from starting, how do we keep them from starting a facility like that?
Oh, I mean, it's all based on.
Well, I know, but
it's,
I
it's one of
mean,
those things where no one's really necessarily driving around looking for it, but that's why we need the eyes and ears of the citizens for
well,
things.
what about issuing an occupancy, when you issue an occupancy permit, do we issue occupancy permits when somebody buys a house, when somebody re-rents a house?
Mhm.
I don't know the answer to that.
We do have residential certificates of occupancy, yes, sir.
We do. And anytime anybody rents a home or buys a home, there is an RCO, a residential.
Sometimes they
occupancy.
don't.
I'm just
Certificate
trying to think out of the
Immediately.
box.
I know
because
several
you
people
started.
that found out 2 years later,
That,
after they moved in, 2 years later, they
They
got
needed-
the
they needed to get
occupancy
that.
notice.
yeah,
Okay. Uh,
yeah.
On 1H, it says, "The operation of the home occupation shall not involve the installation or outside storage of any machinery." Do we also want to put installation, operation, or outside storage of any machinery? Because you don't want somebody on the front yard operating heavy equipment.
Should not involve the installation of or outside storage.
Well, when you think about heavy equipment, are you thinking about, tree trimming? Because everyone's gonna need.
Yeah, but they're not doing a business. You're hiring outside tree trimmers to come to your property. So it's a different
I
financial.
just don't want the
relations.
storage on the
Yeah.
property of that tree trimming truck.
But this is the shall not involve the installation or outside storage of any machinery, but I also don't want to operate any. Just
Sure.
I don't know.
Operation, I'm trying to see if we cover that somewhere else, but
if you do, that's great. But it just came to mind when I was.
yeah, you could always, I mean, when y'all make depending on which direction y'all go with this, you can always add that as a condition.
I mean, I think this is really good, and I'm just kind of tweaking some.
Oh,
stuff
yeah,
at
yeah,
the-
no,
at
no,
the
I've heard
corner.
of this is.
The
this is
city,
really good.
the city has a noise ordinance, correct? So would some of the operations fall under the noise ordinance?
Absolutely.
So I don't know if we need to add that here, if it's taken care of somewhere else.
And that's the one thing that a lot of this has a lot of crossover with any of our other ordinances that we have, just in the code of ordinance, but we can get as specific as we want to get.
I take your point on the noise ordinance, but a noise that is acceptable occasionally, which is kind of what the noise ordinance tends to target, would become quite burdensome to the neighbors if it was every day, 8 hours a day.
Right, I mean, I can consider an artist that used a chainsaw to. make
That's a good
art.
example.
That would be a terrible.
Chainsaw
neighbor,
artist.
But they exist, just hopefully
Yeah.
not your neighbor.
Yeah.
I'm really pondering on this undetectable kind of thought, because I think in some ways I see that it fits the spirit of it. And I'm also thinking about, from an enforcement perspective and codifying it, what that really means, right? And to my thinking, it is less enforceable and less, because it's detection, even in signal detection theory, like the ability to detect things that, I mean, it's obviously also incumbent upon the watcher, right? Even if you get
Right.
into quantum physics, et cetera. But I'm thinking, I mean, gosh, you know, my neighbor can just barely sneeze and I almost know about it because my dog will tell me. So, so I think I'm wrestling a bit with
Okay.
that. But
Think it's too strong?
well, I think it's not appropriately enforceable to truly meet the intentionality.
Yeah, and that's where I'm not a lawyer, so.
Yeah.
Well, what if, though,
Nor
what if
am I, but
What
it,
if it becomes, I mean, I guess what I'm still going back to, if you have like the electricity, sewer, water,
Yeah.
if it becomes detectable when it becomes a problem because the neighborhood is now shut down.
Then that
They're
covers it.
taking, it all of a sudden, everyone's having trouble because we're having a brownout or something, you know what I mean? So it's like, you shall not use an excess amount of utility that somehow impinges on your neighbor's ability to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it becomes detectable when there's a problem.
Yeah.
but I do think that would still apply in this may reasonably continue to enjoy, right?
Which
Because
one
you-
is that?
that's it's under G1. That's the original language. And there may be a different word maybe other than enjoy perhaps, but to my mind, again, much like you're saying with the ordinances.
I would like reasonably continue to be able to enjoy. That doesn't mean that we want there to be no diminution of their enjoyment of the property. Not,
But, I mean, do you have a specific measurement that we could use? Because like, when we saw the freeze, different parts of our city could handle more, you know, burden than
Yeah,
others.
that was
And there was no real control
can't
over
write
it.
law for that.
Well, that's, I mean, like, if you live next to the college, wouldn't they be using more data per se and have more people, like Wi-Fi or something, or cell phone data that's going through? Wouldn't they be using more than
That's
other
not a home business
locations?
though. That's not a home business. That's not what we're talking about.
What if it's just not detrimental to,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
instead of just continue to enjoy, we say
Yeah.
just not detrimental to?
Yeah.
I like that better.
So we would say then, And we have that in some ways, that at the beginning, it says a home occupation is an
G1.
actively customary conducted
Oh, we do say
in a
Not
dwelling unit
detrimental.
that is not detrimental or injurious to adjacent property.
Well,
So
that's
that's
true.
already,
Yeah,
to my mind, codified there.
true.
And then further, it goes on, does not change the character of their neighborhood, and is performed in such a manner that a person of ordinary sensibilities occupying the said adjacent property may reasonably continue to enjoy the use of such property, notwithstanding the operation of the home occupation, and otherwise complies
Okay.
with the following criteria.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I like undetectable, but
What about putting something
I
in
just want to
that
throw it out there.
Yeah,
Affect the
I think
value of
it
the
does meet the
property.
spirit. I'm just
Yeah.
concerned about,
of the property value? I can see a guy starting a business at his house and he's successful. The next thing, he's got 4 people working in his house with him.
well, I think we've covered that here
That's covered.
because,
You can't.
yeah,
You can't have outside
Yeah, you
employees.
can't have
Yeah.
inside employees.
Contract employees. I mean, are they?
No, that's still
Yeah,
covered.
it's
I
still
don't know
covered.
the definition between contract and employees.
I think the way that it's written here still, because it specifies no one outside of the family.
Yeah, it's really
And the
intended-
family occupying the residence furthermore.
Okay,
Well,
that's
if
what
you
I was
have a
gonna ask. Is it
four-bedroom-
immediate family that lives at that residence?
Yes, it's specified clearly in the ordinance.
You gotta be in the home.
Well, if you have a 4-bedroom home that you rent out rooms, you could eventually get around the ordinance.
But then you would be up against the principles of like,
Child, adult.
well, yeah, we have actually provisions on, what is the language? There's a word I'm looking for. Boarding homes. So I think the
true.
language in the ordinance is prohibiting
Limits it to what,
boarding
3?
homes. Yeah, and I think the way that ordinance is written would cover your scenario.
Just curious, are boarding homes not permitted?
That is true, at least if I'm reading the
Yeah,
ordinance
no,
right
in
and
certain-
remember.
I'd have to look at the actual
Interesting.
code, but there are certain requirements. for-
Yeah, there are specific requirements around boarding. I would have to revisit it to be sure, but to my mind, I had looked at that ordinance before and it met those.
But we do have duplexes and I believe a couple quadplexes in the,
Right, but that's different because those are separate units.
Those are multifamily homes.
Multifamily units, which is entirely different than a single-family home.
Which again, I don't know, and I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I don't know if this is going to stop anybody from going outside of what the home occupation rules and regulations state. But again, that's where when somebody sees something that isn't right, or if they suspect something, they let the city know, and then we can investigate
Right.
based on the rules and regulations we have. So like you were saying, what if you do have a home where you've got 4 roommates living in there and they're not family members, but again, if it's going to be too noisy, or if somebody suspects something, they can contact the city, and then we can look at our code and investigate with our code enforcement, go from there.
And there also are federal Fair Housing Act rules that also govern much of these things as well.
Sure.
So, I think that comes into play with many of these aspects as well.
Absolutely.
Are there rules elsewhere in city code that address estate and garage sales?
Yes,
That'd be
Yes.
permitted.
there's a
Okay.
permitting
So we don't need to
process.
cover that here?
No.
No, sir.
Okay, thanks. On 3E, it's contractor shops, i.e. plumbing, carpentry, electrical, roof welding. And my question is this an exhaustive list, or do you want to put EG instead of, IE means that is, and that this is,
Oh, we can do EG as far
EG,
as like
yeah.
example. Oh,
these are
right.
examples.
Right,
Yep,
I got you.
yep.
Yes, sir.
I think EG is appropriate there.
Yes, sir.
I agree with you.
On G in that same section, warehousing and or distribution of personal property or any goods for sale. I mean, personal property might be, it's like, it was never my personal property, it's goods for sale. Except Girl Scout cookies, of course. And then my mind went to, what about, I mean, some people run little tiny cottage businesses of ultra small Amazon fulfillment things. Do we want that to be wrapped into this and not permitted, or do we, how do we, I frankly, I don't see that as burdening the neighborhood, except for the daily UPS guy. But they come Amazon comes almost every day to my house anyway.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as long as it doesn't violate any of these other items, I don't see why something like that couldn't happen. When I think of warehousing and or distribution of personal property,
So as opposed to commercial property, I think just,
Yeah, and a commercial property is what we want to go after, not,
Yeah, because we had somebody that was actually leasing a house.
yeah, in your neighborhood.
Like, yeah, if you door stand, leasing a house, did not live in the house. They leased it for their company, and their garage was full of the cookware that they sold. So that would technically would be.
Commercial
It's
property.
not their
Commercial
personal
property.
property.
It's like a storage unit. They're using it as like a storage unit.
Yeah.
Is basically.
Well, in a fulfillment center.
In a fulfillment center.
Mhm.
Yeah. And hosting parties.
But yeah, that situation is something we definitely want to be
Yeah.
covered here.
That would be covered by the person not living there, right? Because that would be then no longer actually a home occupation because it isn't their home of residence.
Right.
So I think that would
No, the
really
use-
from
the
the
use change.
the use change, I think that would, at the very beginning, would be,
I mean, I would hope so.
But if the
Yes.
homeowner was doing it, it still would be wrong, and we want that.
like if the homeowner was living there and then
And-
also like storing,
Yeah.
would the 25% designation that's listed here to address that to some degree in terms of it getting out of hand? Because I mean, people sell Amway or Mary Kay or, you know,
An
like,
extra bedroom, sure.
actually, you
yeah.
know, I think I does cover that. Because, yeah, I mean, we are specific in saying the property of the residence that occupies no more than 25% of the residence. So, you know, up to 25% of the residence can be utilized for home occupation. And if they're storing something there
So 25% can be used for the business,
for the business,
but the 75% has to be,
occupiable for the family or for the resident, essentially. Now, the only way we're gonna know that, like no one's going in and checking this information, is one of these things where if it's complaint based, if we're hearing something,
Sure.
then, you know, that's when we can
Giving
actually
the city
ask
some
questions.
mechanism to
right, but that would be the
enforce.
mechanism, I think that would cover those examples in a way that was fair and didn't negatively impact folks who had some, you know, entrepreneurial, you know, undertaking.
Selling Hummels or something.
Right, yeah, I mean, because, you know,
It'd be
people do
legal
Mary
to
Kay,
charge
right? Like, that's
people
headquartered
Get a
just down the
permit from
street.
city to do this.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. As far as like a permit, I know we talked about that last time too. Folks pulling over. Now, home occupation isn't intended to be like when you pull a building permit or a fence permit. 'Cause
just
it's supposed to be, again,
Registered that you're doing it.
I mean,
but
we
do-
did not take it that far as on our side, not staff side.
So I think the name of the game at the end of the day, we want home occupations to be inconspicuous.
Yes.
Yes.
But, you know,
Yeah.
your neighbors
That's
should
good.
know that
Good
you're
word.
doing
Yeah.
it.
Right, absolutely. You hit it on the
Yeah,
nail.
that's a
So,
good word. That's a good word.
Yeah.
Well,
And
if you go into a neighborhood and you find out before you close on your house that 4 houses immediately around you all have personal business in them, you may or may not just want to live there. And that's,
I don't know that, again, if they are truly meeting that inconspicuous label, that would be much of an impact. I mean, if 4 of my neighbors are selling Mary Kay, you know, it's just gonna mean I have more lip gloss.
Or an accountant.
Exactly.
Or a
I-
CPA doing tax work
Yeah.
in his.
Or if you do
home
video
office.
production, let me attest. You have
Yes.
takes up a lot of space.
But I think the idea of the registration that you bring up would be also onerous on our city staff to maintain in an appropriate way the data privacy issues. I see that as creating hurdles to people doing economic benefit for themselves in our city. Which I don't think is really, we're not in the business as a city of trying to reduce folks' creativity, entrepreneurism, you know, I think to me that's what that sort of hurdle would really signal in a value sense from our city is that we don't want business here. And I don't think that represents the character of our city accurately. And it would be a lot of burden on, I mean,
Yeah.
the data alone
Yeah.
of managing and safekeeping and, I mean, we're talking about additional staff requirements, likely.
Well, and then to cover the staff requirements, you'd have to charge people to do it, and then people wouldn't want to incur the expense, so they wouldn't do it.
You'll make
and you have
outlaws out of
plans,
normal,
yeah.
ordinary citizens.
Yeah, now your Girl Scouts are, you know, gonna get fines, right? So,
Well, and so because we thought about that too, but yeah, I mean, we stopped before, you know, going down a permitting route.
Yeah, I
on
agree.
this.
But it sounds like the spirit of this is that your neighbors couldn't even tell that
Right.
you're
Right.
doing
That's-
a business out of your home, and therefore there shouldn't be any adverse
Absolutely.
impact on your property value because nobody would even know.
Nobody
Yeah.
should know.
For an acquaintance in Dallas, a neighbor was selling used cars. The entire block, both sides of the street, was cars he had,
It's been here too.
was reselling.
That's not
That was his used car
inconspicuous.
lot, was the public parking on the street.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and Dallas wouldn't do anything about it. They said they couldn't do anything about it.
yeah. But I think this ordinance would
This
address
covers
it.
it. Yeah.
This covers it because he can only park it directly in front of his house,
Mm-hmm.
not his neighbor's house.
What about-
I think we have an existing ordinance that covers that, and, because I recall code enforcement going by this particular place, and they would mark the tires with chalk. And the way the guy got away with it for a while is he
cars.
moved the car down the street, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, you
they-
just have to
Yeah,
move the cars around. It's a
and
nuisance.
it depends on how heavy the code people enforce the existing ordinances. That's the biggest part of all this. I mean, we can make all these rules, and if code enforcement doesn't work,
Well, again, it's complaint-based.
Yeah,
And this gives the city tools
for enforcement.
for enforcement, yeah.
I guess I do, yeah. I live right by apartments, and that is exactly a problem that we've had, is that somebody in the apartment is doing like a used car thing and like taking up all the parking, and it's not in front of his, or her, you know, because they just have an apartment, but their cars are all over the place. And we have wondered what is the rule? Are there rules? And then would this this would be conspicuous because of the cars?
Yeah.
Yes.
And-
sometimes you can look at
Except
the,
And it
if
would
that was
also
an
be
apartment, you
Detrimental or injurious to adjacent
wouldn't be able to
property.
catch that person.
look at the inspection stickers on the windshields.
Right, oh, you can catch them, no, they're obvious.
Well,
It's
but if
pretty
that,
obvious
if that
they're-
person is residing in an apartment, it falls outside of this ordinance.
Yeah.
It does?
Does it?
No, they're still living in a.
They're still living in ours.
These
it's
don't apply to
R4.
only single-family
R4.
homes.
Yeah, it's R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, R6, and those are all levels of our residential, with 6 being the most densely populated. And as well as D1 and D2. So,
But then we also have, okay, I see what because there's the MF1, MF2, MF3, MF4.
yes,
Those are our multifamily residential.
got
So
it.
does that example fall outside of this ordinance or not?
Technically, it would fall outside of anything that's zoned multifamily 1 to multifamily 4.
Is there a reason this would not apply to multifamily? Like a,
No, I mean,
Yeah.
It can, it
Yeah,
should,
that's a
actually.
good point. I
would
think,
say,
I think
yeah.
you would extend it to multifamily.
Yeah, we could absolutely do that. We just need y'all to, like, I would include that
Yeah,
as a.
Good catch.
Amber,
Good
can
catch.
you got that noted?
yep, I do. All right, so, so far, in terms of changes or additions that we've discussed for when we get downstairs and it does come up, also a reminder to me as much as y'all that this is a public hearing, so we'll close that first. And then we will move on to, whatever motion, again, we have many on the table, so we can also deny, but if you did want to approve with the revisions that we've addressed, it would be in section 1A to extend the ordinance through multifamily, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And also, I think the other one that is in section G3B, changing the IE to EG. And I think we kept the language in G1 because it did have the detrimental or injurious. So we have no edit there. Am I missing anything?
Oh, thanks. Sounds good.
Okay. So, that way, when we do have a movement, we can progress appropriately.
Marcos, has city council had a study session on this yet, or?
For
will they
home
be
occup-
seeing it
I'll let,
Oh, okay, I was just gonna say,
Go ahead.
yes, sir, they've had 3 study sessions.
On this?
Yes.
So this
Back
was
when
developed with their,
but it started with code
with code
enforcement.
enforcement.
Code enforcement brought it to them. As far as the planning department, I don't think the have we brought that to city council?
No,
Not
because
the
city
planning
council had
department.
already seen this 3 times, so it's, and I will cover this in my presentation downstairs. So basically, this started with code enforcement. They gave city council 3 presentations. The last one was an amendment to the chapter 29 of the Code of Ordinances for businesses. However, our city attorneys advised it would be better if planning did the revision through this amendment that we're presenting to you
Through
tonight.
94,
okay.
chapter 94.
Great. Thank you again. Anything further on this ordinance?
No, looks good.
All right. Thank you all. With that, we will come back to item A2, discuss agenda items for future planning and zoning commission consideration. Commissioners, items that need to be brought forward? All right. Seeing none, I think that will then conclude our study session. It is presently 7:08 PM. We will reconvene downstairs shortly. We were scheduled at 7, we'll be a little delayed, but we'll
My
move
fault.
down there.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, for very good reason. You had, Good evening and welcome to the City of Farmers Branch Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It is presently 7:14, Monday, March 25th, 2024. We will begin with citizen comments. This agenda item provides an opportunity for citizens to address the Planning and Zoning Commission on any matter that is not posted on the agenda. Anyone wishing to address the commission should complete a citizen's comments registration form and submit it to the chair prior to the start of the meeting. There is a 3-minute time limit for each citizen to speak, with a reasonable limitation on speakers on one topic or item, with a maximum of 15 total minutes on the same topic item. Anyone wishing to speak shall be courteous and cordial. The Planning and Zoning Commission is not permitted to take action on any subject raised by a speaker during citizen comments. However, the Planning and Zoning Commission may have the item placed on a future agenda for action, refer the item to the Director of Planning for further study or action, briefly state existing city policy, or provide a brief statement of factual information in response to the inquiry. I don't believe we've received any citizen comment forms this evening. We will move to regular agenda items. C1, consider approval of the March 11th, 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes and take appropriate action. Commissioners?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as printed, as they are.
Thank you.
Second.
Any further discussion on the topic? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you kindly. Up next, item C2, consider the request for a detailed site plan on approximately 6.49 acres located at 13737 and 13757 North Stemmons Freeway and take appropriate action. Thank you, Lily.
Good evening, Commissioners. Lily Sutton, Planner, and today I will be just discussing the site plan for 13737 and 13757 North Stemmons. As we spoke in study session, these two properties are both within PD 25, and they are both warehouse uses. This request is in regards to the I-35 expansion project and that taking the front TxDOT acquiring the front portions of these two properties. And with that acquisition, these two properties lost some parking spaces and a shared access as well. So this is a request brought about PD 25, which requires a site plan approval before building permits, and so paving and flat work. That's the request. And here on this map, I just want to point it out due to some conversations in study session. The access drives are at the, I'm not sure if you can see the mouse, but it's at this north and then in the center and then at the south as well. So those are the three access points along I-35. And the proposed improvements, the applicant has also submitted a landscape plan as well. So some of the existing landscaping on the site is going to need to be removed in order to, accommodate the parking spaces and the paving. But even with the removal, they are still above the required in both PD 25 and in the CZO. The tree requirements, they're not removing any of the existing trees, so the total trees are meeting the requirements as well. And for the parking and driveway requirements, they will be overparked on both properties, and they are adding a total of 18 parking spaces angled at 45 degrees with a 12-foot shared one-way drive. And there are going to be 4 ADA parking spaces between the two properties. And for the recommendation, the staff finds that this is consistent with our comprehensive plan, and staff recommends approval of this site plan. And with that, I will go to any questions. Staff is here to answer questions as well as the applicant.
Great. Thank you, Lily. Commissioners, any questions for staff?
In the study session, a couple of commissioners asked about the driveways, which you just highlighted. It does seem that there's the 45 degrees, there's like almost enough room for it to be one way once you're in the parking lot. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't look like there's enough to have like 2 lanes. Is it going to be, and I guess that's a private developer over here, but is that going to, if people come in the south entrance, they're going to be driving against traffic, and how are they going to turn around? You know what I mean? So is it going to be a one direction inside on the property?
I can answer that.
Okay.
If you don't mind, just go ahead to the mic, yep, and state your name and address for the record.
Rob Pennington, I'm with Kimley Horn, the civil engineer on this project. The intention is for it to be a one-way travel. And so if somebody were to come in on the south entry, they would need to just hug the south side, the parking there. Instead of going north up that little travel lane, they can just stay going west, and there's room to turn around back there.
Great, thank you. Any further questions for staff? Any other questions for our applicant? I did just want to comment, I appreciate you pointing out the comprehensive plan. I do think this is also consistent with our I-35 vision corridor study, so I just wanted to note that as well.
Yes.
Great. All right, no further questions? Then we do have this item for action.
So first, we need to make a move to close the public hearing, correct?
Oh, this
Or
one
this is not a public hearing?
This is just the detailed site plan. The next one's the public
Yes,
hearing, but thank you. I appreciate it because that will be next.
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the request as presented.
Great, thank you. We have a motion to approve the request for a detailed site plan.
Second.
And seconded, any further discussion on the item? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor? All right, thank you. And this is a site plan, so this doesn't go to city council, does it? Or
It will be
does?
going to city council,
Which
yes.
is the date?
April 16th,
April
the
16th.
day we have talked for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
Up next, item D1, a public hearing. We will conduct a public hearing and consider the request to amend the comprehensive zoning ordinance related to home occupation and take appropriate action. Thank you, Brian.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Brian Campbell, Senior Planning Technician, here this evening to present to you staff's proposed amendment to the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance regarding home occupations. So just a little bit of background before we get started. So this originally started with our Code Enforcement Department, who received several complaints over a business that may or may not have been a home occupation. So this prompted Code Enforcement to brief the City Council over 3 study sessions, including a potential amendment to Chapter 26, businesses of the Code of Ordinances. However, our city attorneys advised that this amendment would be best addressed by planning staff through an amendment to the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, and given that this use was already defined there. So through direction from City Council and the City Manager's Office and discussions with our Code Enforcement Department, the Planning Department was now prompted to present this amendment that we present to you tonight. And at the February 12th, 2023 meeting during study session, planning staff did brief the commission on this item. So on your screen is the excerpt from the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance for home occupation. Currently, home occupations are permitted within all 1-family and 2-family residential zoning districts, as well as all planned development districts permitting these uses. And this proposed amendment would maintain this standard. So the purpose of this ordinance is threefold. First, we want to establish subsection G, home occupation, within Article 2.5, which is land uses requiring special performance standards. Second, we want to establish those performance standards, which I'll get into more on the next slide. And finally, we want to remove the definition of home occupation from Article 7.2, which is definition of uses. We're doing this just to bring about some clarity and have only one point of reference for home occupations within the CZO. So now we get into the performance standards. So this ordinance is seeking to regulate the following. First of all, ensuring that
a home occupation is an accessory use only. And with that, ensuring that the home occupation use is only operated by those residing within the main dwelling unit with no outside employees allowed. Any open and outside storage must not be disruptive and/or exceed property boundaries, and no outside storage or display of goods will be permitted. Parking is limited to the dwelling unit driveway and the immediately adjacent curb. On the next slide, I'll get into some examples of permitted and prohibited uses. And finally, no changes to the external appearance of any building on site shall be permitted. So similar to the presentation I presented during study session, on the right side of your screen, I have some pictorial examples of what we would consider a home occupation use versus what is not. So we would not consider it something akin to a warehousing or distribution facility or an automobile repair facility. However, we would consider a home office to be a perfect example of a home occupation use. So, as I said, now we get into the permitted and prohibited use examples. Again, similar to my study session presentation, just with a few minor modifications. So as far as permitted home occupation uses, those would be such things as music lessons and tutoring for 4 students or less, an office for a notary of the public, accountant, bookkeeper, architect, lawyer, and similar professions, a daycare for 6 or fewer children under 16 years of age, and cottage food production that's in compliance with all applicable state laws. As far as prohibited uses, this would include any use that's not currently permitted within the R1 through D2 zoning districts. These would include motor vehicle-related work performed by persons not residing in the main dwelling unit or related to those persons residing in that dwelling unit, dance, music, or other instruction exceeding 4 students, dental or medical offices or labs, warehousing and distribution facilities, and barbershops and beauty salons. So turning to the recommendations of both the Farmers Branch 2045 plan and staff. Well, first of all, the Farmers Branch 2045 plan recommends the periodic review and updates to the comprehensive zoning ordinance as appropriate. Regarding residential uses, it recommends a healthy mix of 1 and 2 family housing supporting a diverse housing stock within our city, including accessory uses like home occupations. This proposed ordinance is in line with the above goals, and as such, staff does recommend approval of this proposed ordinance as presented. On March 15th, a notice was published in the Dallas Morning News regarding this case. And I do have a correction to make regarding this last bullet point. We actually did receive some correspondence on this case, but that was prior to the notice in the Dallas Morning News. So I just wanted to point that out. With that, that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those. Otherwise, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes,
Actually, I did think of one other question we didn't cover
Sure.
earlier. When we say in G2G, parking of vehicles must be along the curb immediately adjacent to the property.
yes, sir.
Is it abundantly clear to everybody that that means directly in front of the property and not adjacent to my property in front of my next door neighbor's house?
I would say so, yes. Marcos, if you have anything to add, please do, but I would say yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's, that's the intent, is that that parking is to be just directly adjacent, directly in front of their home and driveway. That's it.
Should it say that instead? Just
We could all, what does it say right now?
adjacent to, and
I think if you have a corner lot, that then it wouldn't technically be in front, but that would still be adjacent and potentially appropriate.
good point.
So I feel like the adjacency does cover it in a enforceable, applicable way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. I'm just-
But your point is well
I think-
taken.
I think we know what we intended to say.
Sure.
We're just looking to make sure the words there address what we wanted to do.
Sure.
Any other comments, questions?
Yes, Marcos, when we looked at this in the study session, we looked at the use table. And we talked about potentially adding those multifamily sections.
Yeah, I'm starting to think.
How are those treated currently? Because are we opening up a
Yes,
a
we are.
Pandora's box by adding
Yes, we
that
are.
to this?
Yeah,
I don't
I started
know if-
thinking about that too, just when we were talking about it. By adding that to the multifamily, we're now, if we don't add this to the multifamily, then that basically means that home occupation is not permitted in multifamily areas. So that is really, where we're looking for multifamily is really just through the R1 through D2. We do open this up. If we do have these rules and regulations put into the multifamily areas also as well, what we're saying here is that, yes, multifamily can do home occupation, and that might create some of the concerns that we were talking about.
Well,
earlier.
I don't think anyone wants someone teaching dance above them.
Sure.
In a multifamily
Absolutely.
building, so I think if we were going to look at that, maybe it should be a separate ordinance entirely.
I see.
Or distinguish it, and we would need to table this and try to amend what we're trying to do if we were looking at adding it, broadening this to
Yeah,
multifamily.
right. And I think not including this into multifamily, I think is really, well, again, I'm just staff, so our recommendation is not to include it into multifamily, looking at this now. That's how we're presenting this as well. So,
I think the other scenario we were talking about, you just nailed when we talked about the parking adjacent and direct. I think that solves that issue, so.
Yeah.
I would say I tend to agree, but I do like the idea of having a separate ordinance to extend this privilege to people that live in multifamily units as well, with, specific sort of requirements tailored to that type of dwelling unit, as opposed to just not allowing home occupations for people that live in multifamily units.
No, it's understandable.
Whatsoever, if that makes sense.
and that could come in as a completely separate ordinance, or there is always the option to continue to amend this ordinance, which more than likely, if we were going to do anything with multifamily, I would say we would still be bringing this ordinance back modified to also address any type of multifamily home occupation that might be desired.
If I'm hearing you correctly too, it sounds like staff may need to do a little additional research. Again, I know you did a lot of work looking at this ordinance around different municipalities in our neighborhood, around the Metroplex and what they've done. But if you extend it to there, you may need to do that additional work. So while that would be certainly likely an amendment to this ordinance, would it be fair to say that, in terms of trying to work on that, we could pass this one, and that doesn't preclude a later amendment once sort of that additional study and determining if that's appropriate, recognizing those things could be done at a later juncture?
It would not.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Any further
Yeah,
questions?
just so when we say that, then it was clear that it's not permitted. So again, is that clear? Is there somewhere you would go? So if I'm an accountant and I work from home, like you get into the whole question of what is permitted versus not permitted. So where does the person go to find that definition?
Well, it's the if the use table has an X under the multifamily 1 through 4, then that's basically saying you can do home occupation within that multifamily unit. But in this particular case, we would not have an X, so it would not be permitted at all.
So I'm just saying, so it's not permitted, but where does one go to find out what a what occupation is, since it's not covered under this ordinance? I mean, if I'm a CPA working from home, is that a home occupation?
Oh, do you mean if you're working from home for another business?
No, sure, I'm a CPA, I'm working for other
Okay,
businesses.
this ordinance doesn't preclude you working from home, so say
Okay,
you
so
work
no,
for
so I don't work
XYZ
I'm an
company.
independent contractor. I'm a CPA. I don't work for anybody. I have clients. I have 50 clients, and I live in an apartment. Is that a home occupation?
Right, if that's your business and you're working out of your apartment, that would be a home
So
occupation.
I think we need to definitely just agree
Yes.
that we need to come back and address this, because we certainly would not want to prevent that.
What does your rental agreement say with your landlord? What if he either does or does not permit home businesses? I mean, which agreement supersedes which agreement?
I think that would, my understanding would be that this would apply as a general city ordinance. Now, if you sign a rental agreement, that doesn't preclude that rental agreement from being more stringent than the city ordinance. But as it currently stands, the city ordinance would be prohibitive at the base. And so, much like how the federal laws provide a base and then states can make more stringent laws on top of federal laws.
Well, I'm
it
only
would-
bringing it up because that's something that probably has to be considered.
Yeah, but generally, that would be my understanding of the way that would function is that ours would be the base, requirement, and then those would then be contractual, as opposed to our CZO is actually, that's really the law of the land, and enforceable. Anything done as a contract would only be enforceable as much as that contract is enforceable, right? But it wouldn't involve a municipality in its enforcement.
Well, with this currently not allowing it, the apartments wouldn't have to put that in their contract because it's not allowed by right. So if we amended this, then all the apartments in the city would have to look at their contracts and potentially amend them to forbid it if that's their intent.
Right.
So could we, so if multifamily units, if they want to forbid it or prohibit it, they can write that into their contracts. If some don't, we could still allow it in multifamily. Go ahead and put the X's in for multifamily, but then the on-street parking, we limit that to just single family. So if you're going to have, you can't have additional vehicles park if you're in multifamily, but you can in your driveway or in front of the house if you're single family. So we write that into the code right now.
And anytime I've ever rented, they have pretty stringent parking requirements already written into the contract that I've signed. So I've not found that to be an area that lacks.
Well, again, in my experience living across some apartments, they park on the street. And it's clear that that's what's happening near where I live. There are people who operate sort of a used car operation. They live in the apartment and they park, and then they just sort of keep moving the cars to stay ahead of enforcement.
I would suggest we approve this as it is for single-family homes. We can come back and revisit it if we hear from people that there's some interest among multifamily to make a change to that, or we could take it. But I would, for readability and usability, somebody made a good point about dance lessons in an apartment, which would be inappropriate. So it might be easier just to make another ordinance that's modeled on this, that's strictly applicable to multifamily, if we were to do that. But for purposes of this evening's discussion, let's stick to this and approve this and table the multifamily. That's my suggestion.
And I think I'm hearing a willingness from staff to at least research and pursue if that's a viable option to have a later revision that would include multifamily.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, I think we need to first consider closing the public hearing.
I think you need to open it first.
Oh, we need to open it first. Thank you. Brian, you're keeping me honest. Okay. Well,
A closed door.
all right. So, this is a public hearing. So therefore, we will receive comments from the public on item D1. Seeing none and having received no citizen comment cards on this item, commissioners, we can.
Now I'll move to close the public hearing.
Thank you so much. See, I was ahead too, not just you.
I second that.
Second, okay. Any further discussion on the public hearing? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor to close our public hearing? That carries. Thank you all. And now we will receive action on the item. I did want to just continue to note that we did have one edit as still discussed in study session. If memory serves me correctly, it was under G3B as in Bravo. Okay, so we will,
Change IE to EG.
yes, a change of IE to EG. Thank you for the clarification further. All right, commissioners.
I recommend approval of this ordinance as noted.
All right,
I'll second that.
any further discussion on the item? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor? All right. Thank you all for your participation. With that, this will also go to City Council. and will go-
That same date, April 16th.
April 16th.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you kindly.
Mhm.
And that brings us to adjournment. It is presently 6:40 PM. Thank you all again for your service.